Was 2025 the worst year in history for Hollywood?
It's pretty close. It's been a pretty uninspiring year for movies. Pretty much all the top films that have come out this year, the big summer blockbusters, have either been sequels or remakes, or just generic Hollywood comic book slop. So yeah, it's been pretty uninspiring, all things considered. And I think they've had some of the lowest box office in decades.
What were the sort of lowlights of the year for you? What were the worst films that came out?
Oh, take your pick. I mean, The Running Man was a really boring, uninspired remake of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie from back in the 80s. Uh, Predator Badlands was yet another attempt to recapture the magic of the Predator franchise, which they've never managed to do since the original movie. All of the various superhero flicks that we got, like Superman, was pretty dull. It's not really going to do much for the James Gunn universe. Even things like the Marvel movies, they used to be money printers. Pretty much all three of those films were just boring, forgettable slop. It's not been a great year for movies, sadly.
And what's the underlying reason for that? Is this poor production values? Is this bad writing? Is this wokeness? What are the sort of themes that stand out for you?
I think it's an over reliance on tried and tested approaches that have worked for the past 10, 15 years. Like the assumption was, well, everyone likes big budget superhero movies, so we're just going to keep making more of them. And clearly that has run its course now. There's a tendency to overinflate the budgets of movies so that even relatively modest films are still costing like 100 million at least. And when you get that amount of money on the line, there's a kind of corporatized risk aversion that starts to take hold because there's a lot of money at stake and you don't want to take risks on like crazy experimental projects or new IPs or whatever. And you end up with just more of the same. So all of those things combined, it makes a tremendously dull cinema landscape at the moment.
It just makes you think, is it really that hard to make a good movie? And maybe it is in 2025, but we did have a kind of golden era, maybe even 15 years ago, where you had so many incredible films coming out in one year. And this year, I can't even think of one film that you'd say is like going to be a classic in 10 or 15 years' time.
No, exactly. You know, it's not necessarily impossible to make a good movie nowadays. We've had a few good ones this year. They're not going to be remembered necessarily, but Sinners was really good. It's clearly the work of a director who had an actual creative vision instead of just a studio railroading someone. Weapons was a decent little horror movie. So things like that. Even Warfare, like a relatively low budget war movie made by people who were actually in the Iraq War, didn't make a huge splash, and it's probably not going to be remembered, but it is still a decent film. And so there's the occasional one that's coming out, but yeah, nothing iconic. And I don't know, there's something about the movies right now that is just not capturing people's imagination. It might be the fact that movie tickets are at least, what, 15, £20 a pop now? And people are less and less inclined to go and spend that money at the cinema, particularly when it's going to be released on streaming, whatever it might be, within a month or two anyway. So, like, what's the incentive?
What did you make of the film Bugonia? Have you seen that? I thought that was a great horror film or kind of thriller comedy that came out recently. That was like my favourite film of the year.
I haven't seen that one yet. I have heard good things about it, but yeah, personally haven't seen it, so I can't really form an opinion about it, I'm afraid.
So Matt Walsh tweeted saying, "What pop culture peaked in 2007 to 2008. There was Will Be Blood, No Country for Old Men, Zodiac, Michael Clayton, Into the Wild, Superbad, The Assassination of Jesse James, all came out in 2007. The Dark Knight, The Wrestler, and Tropic Thunder were released in 2008. Do you agree with him that that was kind of peak modern cinema?
I mean, I don't know if I'd agree with his assessment of the particular year, but it does feel like we have peaked in terms of like a pop culture and a shared cultural experience that we can all get invested in. It feels like we just don't have that anymore. It used to be that, a movie like, say, The Matrix would come out and everyone would talk about it because it was this cultural event. But in the past 10 years, it's difficult to think of anything that, has really come out that we are all invested in and everyone wants to talk about. So he could be right round about that period is probably where the homogeneity started to kick in, and things became a lot safer. We started to get just the conveyor belt of like big franchises, that sort of thing. And yeah, we've lost that spontaneity that you used to get with pop culture, where something new and interesting would come along, and it feels like we are long overdue something like that, and we just haven't had it recently.
I know that something that you talk about a lot in your reviews and your YouTube channel is the political messages of modern films. And I know that in 2020, obviously, there was this huge BLM thing, and that fed into pop culture, into Hollywood, and so on. In 2025, are they still producing so-called woke films, or has that died down a bit?
The general consensus is that it is dying down, but you're always going to get a few holdouts, and perhaps something like One Battle After Another is a good example of that, where it is just a straight-up propaganda movie, extolling the virtues of domestic terrorism and just all the usual nonsense. And it is hard to believe that a movie like that was greenlit in this day and age. It really feels like we've moved past that, but it probably speaks volumes to the fact that like it was a massive flop at the box office, and it contributed to the worst October at the box office in 30 years. And that's not even adjusting for inflation. These are movies that people do not want now. People are so tired. There's an actual political fatigue now, I think, that's kicked in with audiences, where they don't want political propaganda in one direction or the other. They just want to go to the movies to escape that stuff. And Hollywood would be well advised to listen to it.
There's a really interesting clip from Matt Damon a few years ago talking about modern films and why filmmakers are no longer taking big risks. And he said that back in the 2000s, you would release a film, it would go out in the cinema, and if it was a flop in the movie theaters, then it didn't necessarily matter, because the DVD sales would also kind of boost the profits of the movie companies or the movie production companies. But today you don't have that. Maybe you've got the same thing on streaming, but it's not the same. So what's your thesis? Do you agree with Matt Damon around the reason why movie makers aren't taking these big risks as they used to on, say, new scripts and original films?
I think it's that combination of he's obviously 100% right, and he certainly knows the industry better than I ever will. But yeah, the demise of physical media has been a huge blow to like the back end revenue of a lot of these productions, because streaming services, it doesn't generate anything like the same kind of profits for you as physical media does. So that is definitely a huge component of it. The other big component of it is just the fact that movies have gotten a lot more expensive to make, whether it's an over-reliance on VFX, whether it's just more bloat within the studios, whether it's it costs more to shoot on location. Apparently this year has seen like a 20 or 30% drop in the number of productions that are shooting in the LA area or even operating out of there, purely because it's become so expensive. You pay so much tax to operate there. They're moving all these things overseas to other places where they can get a better deal. And so add all those things together, it just contributes into that general risk aversion, because the margins now are so much tighter on a success or a failure. And there's fewer points, there's fewer second chances to recoup your losses later on.
So you have these incredible movie makers, these directors like James Cameron and Ridley Scott, who used to produce amazing films. And, we used to love those films in the 80s, the 90s. I mean, for example, Gladiator, I think that was an amazing film. But then Ridley Scott makes Gladiator 2, and I think there's a quote of him saying, this is like the best film that he's ever made. And I'm watching it and I'm thinking, how is that possible? Same thing with, James Cameron today, making some pretty awful films. Why is it that these directors who used to be like amazing are now producing absolute nonsense? Yeah,
I think in the case of Ridley Scott, Ridley is a very, very old man now, and he should probably retire. He's. I've read reports from people who worked as like his DP on things like Gladiator 2 and Napoleon. He's just not. He's not putting in the effort these days. He's barely even showing up on set. So like he should just retire from filmmaking. He's got a tremendous back catalogue of incredible movies that he made, in the 80s, the 90s, even the 2000s. That's enough. He's got nothing more to prove now. With someone like James Cameron, I don't know what it is. I made a video about this just recently. He has somehow become so absorbed in this world of Avatar that he's created. He's spent like effectively the past 20 years working on it. It obviously means a lot to him. It honestly just feels like generic, standard sci-fi adventure story. It's like someone fed Dances with Wolves and Fern Gully into Chat GPT and just said, like, give me a generic script of this in a sci-fi setting, and that's what you've got. Visually, I think that's what appeals to him. It's a visual, technical marvel, but if there's no real substance and there's no interest in stories or characters to back it up, people don't care. They go to these movies like Avatar 1 and 2, they spend like $2 billion on them, like they make insane amounts of money, and everyone forgets about them like a couple of months after they've left cinemas. No one ever talks about them. They've got no cultural footprint, and it's, in the case of guys like Cameron, it's a shame that he's devoted so much of his career now to something that no one really cares about.
I can't remember, I think it was in one of your films about James Cameron, or one of your reviews. I can't remember if it was him or another person, but you were saying that basically if you give a director complete independence because it's such a big name, they have this kind of ego and no one is keeping them in check to make sure the movie is actually a good movie. They, if you give them such a big budget and such just complete independence to do whatever they want, then in a way they're making a worse film because it's all about their own vision. And there's, but then there's also the other end of things where you've got too many people trying to interfere. So there's a right balance, isn't there, where, studios need to give directors some independence, but not complete reign to do whatever they want.
There's a balance to be struck for sure. And the nature of that balance kind of depends on the director. Like some guys, you can trust them to have their own creative vision, and they will give you a great piece of art at the end of it. Other people need to be reined in a little bit, and I think the example that you're citing there was a guy like Taika Waititi, who did, produced tremendous films like Jojo Rabbit, excellent stuff. Obviously did good things for the Marvel universe with Thor Ragnarok. That was a big success. Then, they gave him complete creative control, and he's like this mad creative genius who doesn't have any restraint or any self-discipline. And when there's no one around to tell him no, or are you sure this is really a good idea? Guys like that just go completely off the rails. They need some checks and balances to hold them in place and, rein in some of their wilder instincts. And so I suppose it's the job of a studio and it's the job of a good producer to understand the director they're working with and know how much control and how much checks and balances they should have. But yeah, it is definitely something that they need to be aware of, because you can get absolute disasters with hundreds of millions of dollars lost if the wrong guy is given too much control.
I remember when Avatar came out originally, the first one, obviously everyone was kind of marveled by the CGI and the incredible look of the film. The storytelling was, another matter, but that was really the cutting edge, I suppose, of CGI at the time. But now every single film seems to just be CGI, and we're so used to it as audiences seeing some incredible images. This over-reliance on CGI is becoming controversial now. So there was this recent trailer that came out for a Moana film, a kind of live-action remake of the Moana Disney film, and that film only came out, I think, less than 10 years ago anyway. So it's, and the trailer was basically all CGI. It was like, it didn't even look like a live-action film. So what do you make of this weird use of CGI and this obsession with CGI from Hollywood producers?
It is... it comes down to a lack of confidence in the product, because what they'll do, right, if you were to say shoot a scene that's all physically done, right, with like lighting and like the backgrounds and everything like that, and you decide later that it's not quite right, we want to change it, well, it's a huge undertaking to then alter that. You might have to go back and do reshoots, which are very expensive. But if you just shoot everything like basically in a green room, right, and you can put in any CGI around it that you want, you've got all the options under the sun to just manipulate it any way you want afterwards, based on like user feedback, based on test screenings, whatever you want to say. It's where you don't have a clear artistic vision and you don't really know what you want to do with this movie. And so it just allows filmmakers to defer filmmaking decisions until further down the road when they've essentially got a committee that tells them what to do. That's part of the reason why CGI is so prevalent now, and partly because it allows them to just do things easier. Like, rather than have to construct an enormous set that's going to be hugely time consuming, rather than have pyrotechnics go off so that you can have explosions and gunfire and stuff. Just CGI all in later because it's less risk, it's less work to set it all up. And it's that combination of indecision and laziness and lack of creative vision that results in all of this stuff. And yeah, what's the point in creating a supposedly live action movie like Moana when none of it is live action? It's 90% CGI. It's just a joke.
Okay, so sticking with Moana, that film's coming out next year. I'm assuming that's not sort of one of the ones you're looking forward to. Maybe it is. What's on your list of films next year that you're, most excited about? I know that I can't think of, off the top of my head, too many, but 28 years later, I think there's like a part 2, maybe 29 years later, I'm sure they won't call it that, is coming out. And there's lots of other big blockbusters. What are you most looking forward to?
I think 28 years later, it's called The Bone Temple, which is like the concluding part of this. I guess it'll be fine. It's a different director working on it this time. It's Nia DaCosta, whose last big movie was Captain Marvel 2, so make of that what you will. I think the one I'm interested in is Project Hail Mary, which is based on the sci-fi novel by Andy Weir. It's the same guy who did The Martian, which ended up getting made into a really good film adaptation, probably Ridley Scott's last good movie. But anyway, they're working on that. I'm hoping that's going to be a big success because I'd love to see more original projects, like especially in the sci-fi realm that's a little bit thought-provoking, a little bit interesting, plays with some cool ideas. So that's probably the one I'm most excited for, but that's only March that comes out. In terms of the big summer blockbusters, I was looking at a list here actually. We've got Avengers Doomsday, which is like the 35th Marvel movie, Spider-Man Brand New Day, which is like the 4th Spider-Man movie, Toy Story 5, Shrek 5, Super Mario 2, Batman Part 2. Like, it's all sequels or remakes. Like, Moana is another example, a live-action remake. Yeah, things like that do not fill me with excitement for the future of cinema, I'm afraid.
What about Christopher Nolan's Odyssey? What do you think of Christopher Nolan's latest adventures? This is already causing controversy by some who are looking at like the armor that he's using and these pictures that they're putting out, and some of the casting decisions are quite controversial. Are you looking forward to that film?
It is a weird fit for Christopher Nolan. Like, I associate him with very mind-bending science fiction type movies, a bit of action blended in. I don't really associate him with historical epics, and particularly his crazy way of telling stories where everything's non-chronological and like there's all kinds of stuff that jumps around all over the place. I don't know if he's the guy to be doing something like this. Particularly when I look at, Tenet, that was probably like peak Christopher Nolan in terms of how complex it was and how like difficult it was to actually wrap your head around. Obviously, he can do things like Oppenheimer, which is, more linear, but arguably a little bit long-winded, and I'm not sure if it's is going to hold up as well as people imagine, but still a good movie. So I guess this is my long-winded way of saying is I wouldn't necessarily have picked him to do a movie like this, but I'll at least go into it with an open mind. And hey, if it's great, then awesome, because I think it would be nice to see the return of the historical epic as a staple of big budget Hollywood filmmaking.
I know that you produced your own pilot to, was it a TV series that you're going to produce, or you were thinking about producing, based on a book that you'd written?
Yes.
And I watched a video recently of you talking about why that went bad, why that went good, talking about the good and bad of it. Are you planning on doing any more of your own productions, something that you might be involved in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually got a couple more that are coming out in that same sort of universe. So we did another crowdfunding campaign, raise more money. And so we've got 2 more short films coming out with, that same sort of, the same group of characters, same fictional universe. And I think from having done that first one, you learn a lot of lessons about how, you go about the business of filmmaking. Certainly from my own perspective, I learned a lot in terms of like script writing. When I did that short film initially, that was my very first attempt at ever writing a script for anything. And so you make a lot of mistakes along the way. Sometimes the production gets overtaken by just the sheer amount of stuff going on in it, and sometimes your script ideas and your characters can get lost in the mix. So yeah, that's a learning experience. And now what we're going to be doing is we've taken that and hopefully produce something next time around it's going to be a lot more tight, concise, more focused on the story and the characters. But it's an interesting process, and it's an interesting insight into how the world of particularly independent filmmaking is done, because you wrestle with a lot of restrictions when you're doing independent films on a budget, whether it's time, whether it's the amount of crew that are available, what your actors can do, all that sort of thing. And so it's been a fun experience, and yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more of it.
It sounded like an absolute nightmare producing that short film from what you were talking about in your review or your YouTube video. You were saying that there's so much regulations and bureaucracy, and the actors couldn't speak some of the lines properly. It just didn't work.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit more about what are the lessons that you've learned and what went wrong on that film?
Well, I think from the sort of bureaucracy point of view, that's like when you're working on any production that you have to use the acting unions with. They've got loads of restrictions about what you're allowed to do and so on, and it means essentially you just have to spend a lot of money to be able to shoot the film. And we were in that sort of awkward in between, where if it was a big budget movie with loads of money behind us, we could afford to do all those things and pay all those fees and everything. If it was a super low budget thing and you were, essentially using amateurs or whatever, or people doing you favors, then a lot of those rules don't really apply to you because it's just a little, it's an amateur movie. We were in between, where it's like all the rules and restrictions applied to us, but we didn't have the money to be able to pay all that and then do all the things we wanted to do in the film. So that was definitely a thing that you have to work with, unfortunately, when you're making any kind of professional movie. And yeah, one or two, maybe one of the actors had a bit of trouble with their lines, and so when you can't have the actor saying the monologue or whatever they need to deliver, then you had to recut the entire ending to accommodate that, and that was unfortunate. So that's stuff you can't legislate for, unfortunately. And when you run out of time, you run out of resources. You just have to make the best of what you've got. But again, lessons learned in terms of how much of a buffer you leave, how much of a contingency you have in place for all that sort of thing. So
maybe 2026 we can watch a Critical Drinker movie in the cinema.
Not in the cinema. That's probably a bit too soon, but maybe one day. Who knows? Who knows, indeed.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man.